At a bustling international airport, Officer Williams, a stressed-out 40-year-old security guard, locks eyes with Indira, a soft-spoken 50-year-old Indian traveler. What should be a routine baggage check turns into a high-stakes confrontation, igniting a chain of events that no one saw coming. Tempers flare, accusations fly, and in mere seconds, the world's attention turns to a viral video capturing an unsettling moment of power and prejudice. As both the public and the press close in, Williams faces the shocking fallout while Indira fights for her dignity. Hidden motives surface, allies emerge from unexpected corners, and a single decision could forever change the fate of everyone involved. Watch the video to discover the truth behind this explosive airport encounter. This is how it started. Officer Williams woke with a dull headache, the sour taste of last night's argument with his boss still lingering. Dressing in his security uniform, he felt each button tighten around his frustration. His drive to the airport was punctuated by honking cars and a spilled coffee, only heightening his foul mood. By the time he reached the busy international airport, his mind buzzed with resentment. That morning, the overhead lights felt harsher, the corridors louder. He snapped at a colleague who only offered a friendly greeting. Stress weighed on him like a heavy vest. Meanwhile, Indira stood by the curb, gently adjusting the handle of her suitcase. 50 years of life had taught her patience, but she was unused to the bustling chaos of this city's airport. She silently prayed for a smooth trip to see her son. Her gentle excitement clashed with the dread tightening in Williams's chest. As fate would have it, the two would meet at the security gate. Each step Indira took brought her closer to Williams, who towered behind a metal detector, scowling at the growing lines. Unaware of his turmoil, Indira placed her bag on the conveyor belt, feeling a flutter of nerves. A mere few paces and a handful of seconds separated them, but it was enough for the tension to build. Neither realized that this mundane airport checkpoint would become the stage for an incident that would soon grip the entire country's attention. Williams scanned the crowd with narrowed eyes, searching for any hint of wrongdoing. He was tired of daily security threats that never materialized, yet always demanded vigilance. His stare landed on Indira, an older Indian woman balancing a purse and a carry-on. Something about her calm demeanor felt suspicious to him, though he couldn't explain why. Indira's heart thumped gently. She offered her passport to Williams with a polite smile. He barely acknowledged it. Instead, he barked out standard questions in a clipped tone, eyes flickering between her face and the name on her documents. His questions rattled off in quick succession, as if he were eager to trip her up. She answered steadily, explaining her flight details. Williams's mood, however, was as rigid as his pressed uniform. He noticed a box of sweets in her bag during the scan, and his suspicion flared. Who travels with so many homemade confections? Without further pleasantries, he motioned for a secondary check. Indira froze, unsure what she had done wrong. The queue behind her shifted restlessly, but Williams ignored their glances. A faint tremor coursed through Indira as she stepped aside, inwardly praying this would be a minor inconvenience. Yet something in Williams's stern glare and clipped voice suggested a storm was brewing, one that would not dissipate easily. Behind the security cordon, a few airport staff exchanged uneasy looks. They recognized Williams's body language, taut shoulders, a clenched jaw, and that unwavering suspicion. Even so, nobody wanted to question his authority in the midst of a crowd. Indira opened her carry-on, revealing neatly folded clothes, her medication, and a box of sweets labeled in a language Williams didn't recognize. He demanded she explain each item. When she mentioned they were gifts for her son, he scoffed as though unconvinced. An onlooker discreetly pulled out a phone, finding Williams's attitude unsettling. Another passenger whispered to a friend, "He's singling her out." Yet Indira tried to keep her composure, understanding how quickly these moments could escalate. Williams's tone sharpened. "What else are you hiding?" he barked. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She insisted there was nothing more, but his suspicions seemed to surge irrationally. He turned to a colleague and loudly declared Indira might need a full pat-down. A hush fell over the immediate area. Indira felt her heart pound. Was she in danger? Or was this just standard procedure gone awry? Her carefully packed belongings were now scattered, her dignity exposed in front of strangers. Deep inside, a mix of fear and disbelief took root, foreshadowing a confrontation that would soon spiral out of control. At that moment, a traveler behind Indira protested, "Hey, officer, she hasn't done anything." But Williams glowered and raised a hand for silence. His temper flared in his eyes, a rage that had been simmering all day. Indira felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She hastily blinked them away, willing herself not to cry. She extended her arms, allowing the pat down, even though it felt invasive and humiliating. Passers-by stared. Some recorded. Williams's gloves roughly brushed against her sleeves, knocking her scarf askew. She mumbled, "Please be careful. That's my medication." But he only grunted, rummaging through her bag with impatient force. The small box of sweets tumbled to the floor, wrappers scattering. Indira gasped. Williams snapped, "If you don't want your belongings damaged, you should pack normally." His voice, harsh and unyielding, resonated with a tension fueled by more than mere suspicion. Something deeper, possibly anger toward a system he felt was failing him. In that instant, multiple phones captured the moment. Indira's trembling hands, the scattered sweets, Williams's tight-lipped fury. Airport security around them paused, uncertain whether to intervene or let Williams complete the search. For Indira, that humiliating pat-down felt like it would never end. For Williams, it was a grim validation of his worst fears, despite zero evidence of wrongdoing. The event set the stage for a social media storm none of them saw coming. Within hours, footage from onlookers spread across social media. Each clip showed Williams's aggressive stance and Indira's distressed face. Online viewers erupted in condemnation. Hashtags about racial profiling and abuse of power flooded Twitter. News outlets seized the story, replaying the video in looping segments. Meanwhile, Williams sat in a backroom office, attempting to justify his actions to a grim-faced supervisor, Captain Summers. The captain's gaze was fixed on a laptop screen, watching the video for the third time. He glared at Williams, then paused the footage on the moment Indira's belongings were thrown aside. "This looks bad." "No, it's worse than bad," Summers said, frustration tugging at every word. "The department is getting calls from reporters and advocacy groups. They're talking protests." "Williams, what were you thinking?" Williams, arms crossed over his chest, insisted he followed protocol. But even as he spoke, guilt gnawed at him. The screams of condemnation online felt deafening. Elsewhere, Indira waited in a modest airport motel, her trip delayed by the commotion. She eyed her phone, seeing countless missed calls from her son. Friends forwarded news links, urging her to speak out. Yet she felt paralyzed, replaying the incident over and over in her head. Though shaken and humiliated, she wasn't one to nurse bitterness. Her thoughts drifted to how she could prevent this from happening to others. Outside, the airport hummed as always. But beneath that routine flow of travelers, a wave of public outrage was building, ready to crash down on Williams and the entire security division. The next day, a tense hush enveloped the security checkpoint where Williams normally stood. Travelers whispered as they approached, many flashing worried glances. A few openly filmed with their phones, hoping to capture any further misconduct. Williams, summoned again by Captain Summers, trudged to the manager's office. Within those drab walls, Summers wasted no time handing Williams a suspension notice. The words, "pending investigation," seemed to echo ominously. "This department can't ignore the public backlash," Summers said, tapping a pen on a thick stack of complaints. "You'll stay off duty until we get to the bottom of this." Williams left, anger churning in his gut. He felt blindsided and betrayed by a system he'd served for nearly 2 decades. Yet a nagging voice inside reminded him how Indira's tearful face had sparked something in him. Something that felt disturbingly like remorse. Indira, meanwhile, finally boarded a rescheduled flight, arriving at her son's home late that evening. The ordeal weighed on her, though she tried to focus on her family. Her son, Rohit, seethed when he saw the viral clips. He wanted to file lawsuits to protest to expose injustices. Indira, quieter but equally resolute, believed they must seek accountability without stoking hate in return. Though they were in separate worlds now, the fallout from that brief airport encounter tightened like a knot between them, demanding resolution. As Williams stewed in forced leave, rumors swirled among airport staff. Some believed he had simply buckled under job stress. Others were convinced he was deeply prejudiced. Jenna, a fellow officer who had quietly documented concerns about racial bias, watched from the sidelines. Surprising everyone, she reached out to Williams. He opened his door to her hesitant knock, cheeks flushing with shame. "You're the last person I expected to see," he muttered. Jenna cleared her throat. "I'm not here to judge you," she said softly, "but I've been tracking these issues for a while. If you're open to it, maybe I can help you see where things went wrong and how we can fix them." Williams stiffened. He wanted to deny any wrongdoing. Yet Jenna's calm, sincere expression disarmed him. She explained how subtle biases could build over time, especially in a high-pressure environment. "People feel targeted," she said gently, "and we need to do better. That includes you." Her words left Williams unsettled, torn between pride and a budding sense of responsibility. He thought of Indira's trembling hands and realized perhaps there was more he needed to understand. The conversation ended with no firm resolution, but a door had opened, a chance for reflection and, possibly, redemption. Whether Williams would step through that door remained to be seen. Indira awoke in her son's guest room, still haunted by flashes of the security checkpoint. She winced at the memory of Williams's harsh tone, but her focus now lay on healing and preventing further injustices. Rohit busied himself contacting advocacy groups and lawyers, eager to champion his mother's cause. He grew angry each time he replayed the video, questioning how such discrimination could still exist. Indira listened calmly, her own resolve forming like a quiet flame. She felt no desire for revenge, but she wanted the airport, and Williams, to learn from this incident. In phone calls with advocacy leaders, she emphasized the need for systemic changes rather than personal vengeance. Her voice, always measured, carried the weight of her experiences. Meanwhile, messages of support flooded in from strangers who'd seen the viral footage. Some told stories of similar encounters. Others apologized on behalf of those who treated her poorly. Indira felt strengthened by this network of empathy. Still, a lingering ache reminded her of how easily trust can be broken. She prayed for the fortitude to move forward. As she prepared for her son's upcoming graduation festivities, she knew the confrontation at the airport was far from over. Once she returned, she'd have to face the investigation and decide how fully to engage in its outcome. Summoned to an internal affairs office, Williams sat at a rectangular table opposite two investigators, a fluorescent light buzzing overhead. They grilled him on procedural details. "Why did you single out Indira? Were you influenced by her background or appearance?" Williams clung to the claim of suspicious behavior, but the investigators persisted. They noted the video showed no suspicious gestures, only his escalating temper. Slowly, he felt cornered by his own inconsistencies. He swallowed hard, replaying the event in his mind. Was Indira truly suspicious, or had his own biases and stress clouded his judgment? The tension in the room was stifling. One investigator eyed him compassionately, asking if he wanted to amend his statement. Williams's throat tightened. Fear and shame warred within him. Meanwhile, Indira gave her account in a separate session. She recounted each step in a calm, concise manner. Though her voice trembled when describing her humiliation, she never exaggerated. Her restraint made the investigators sit up and pay closer attention. After the interviews, Williams trudged to his car, shoulders slumped. He glanced at the sky, feeling as though the clouds mirrored his own inner storm. Uncertain what the verdict would be, he sensed that his life was on the brink of irreversible change. In the midst of the investigation, a civil rights advocate named Arya Patel appeared at Williams's doorstep. Her reputation for defending victims of racial discrimination preceded her. Clutching a folder of documents, she introduced herself in a measured, professional tone. "I'm working with Indira and her family," she stated calmly. Williams braced himself for an onslaught of accusations. Instead, Arya spoke softly but firmly, describing proposed reforms for airport security protocols. Her eyes flickered with conviction. "I'm not here to provoke you, Officer Williams. I want to see if you'll help fix what went wrong. Whether you regret your actions or not, the public deserves accountability." Williams's pulse pounded. He had expected anger and condemnation, not an invitation to collaborate on change. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose inside him. Defensiveness, lingering bitterness, and a flicker of remorse. Arya left him with a single question. "Will you keep hiding behind denial, or will you face the truth?" She handed him a card bearing her number before walking away. Watching her disappear down the hall, Williams felt strangely exposed. The moment carried a glimmer of possibility, an opening to right a wrong, if only he found the courage to admit his failings. That evening, Williams sat in his darkened living room, phone in hand. Against his better instincts, he opened the viral video of the airport incident once more. Each frame replayed in painful clarity. His brusque commands, Indira's dismay, the scattered sweets on the floor. He paused the video at Indira's tearful face. An ache bloomed in his chest. Guilt, once vague, now hit him with brutal force. Memories of joining the force as a principled young officer came rushing back. He'd taken the job to protect people, not dehumanize them. His eyes strayed to Arya Patel's card on the coffee table, then to a photo of himself in uniform years ago. He wondered how he'd veered so far from the man he once was. Across town, Indira sat with her son, sipping tea and preparing for his graduation ceremony. She told him that while she wanted justice, she also yearned for healing and understanding. Rohit, though still angered, held his mother's hand, promising to support whatever path she chose. Far from the airport's glare, two people lay awake, one wrestling with remorse and the other with quiet fortitude, both unsure what the next day would bring. The investigation plodded on, but public pressure to resolve the case mounted. Protests formed outside the airport, demanding fairness and transparency. Reporters clamored for statements from both Williams and Indira. Jenna, the fellow security officer, approached Williams again. She shared her records of past complaints, other instances of travelers feeling targeted at security. She explained that each story revealed a pattern. Stress, bias, and lack of proper training often led to these confrontations. Williams initially balked at the idea of adding his name to her findings. But as he read testimonies from travelers who felt singled out or humiliated, he began to see Indira's ordeal in a broader context. "Maybe it's not just about me," he admitted, voice tinged with regret. Jenna nodded, relieved to see a flicker of empathy. She believed Williams might still salvage his career if he chose honesty and reform rather than denial. Inspired by their conversation, Williams dialed Arya's number. It rang twice before she answered. He inhaled, heart pounding, and found himself saying the words he hadn't dared voice out loud yet. "I need to make this right." Word spread that Williams intended to meet Indira privately. Many assumed it was a stunt to save face. But when Indira agreed, they arranged to meet in a quiet coffee shop near the airport. Williams arrived first, palms sweaty. Seeing Indira step through the door tightened his chest. She appeared composed yet cautious. Once seated, he stumbled through an apology. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. I let my anger and bias take over." Indira's face softened, though tears brimmed in her eyes. She thanked him for recognizing the hurt he caused but emphasized this wasn't just about her. "Others have suffered too," she said gently. "If your apology is real, it should lead to change." He nodded, shame burning his cheeks. This was more than he deserved, but he felt a glimmer of relief at her willingness to meet. He pledged to advocate for better training and to help mend the deep cracks in airport security culture. Their meeting ended quietly, with no grand gestures or dramatic hugging. Yet a silent understanding passed between them, The path to healing was steep, but perhaps no longer impossible. Following their conversation, Williams spoke out publicly, admitting he had allowed prejudice to cloud his judgment. Unsurprisingly, his admission triggered both skepticism and support. Media outlets debated whether his remorse was genuine or a maneuver to avoid harsher punishment. Airport officials, feeling the heat, fast-tracked new protocols for unbiased screening. Sensitive cultural training workshops were announced, aimed at preventing future incidents. Captain Summers, though frustrated by the negative press, acknowledged this was the only path forward. Indira watched these developments from her son's home. Seeing Williams's public statement left her with mixed emotions. Relief that progress was happening, and lingering sadness that such moments of recognition often come after harm has been done. Still, she cooperated with ARIA and other advocacy groups, refining policies and sharing her story to encourage real dialogue. Even Rohit, initially enraged, found hope in his mother's approach, realizing that meaningful change often starts with empathy and open-hearted efforts. Reinstated under strict conditions, Williams returned to the airport, standing once more at a security checkpoint. His posture was changed, no longer stiff with anger, but marked by cautious humility. Passengers passed by, some recognizing him from news reports. He offered polite nods and softer instructions. Around the same time, Indira arrived for her flight back home after her son's graduation. She approached the checkpoint, heart fluttering. Their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, just a subtle nod. In that unspoken moment, both acknowledged their shared history and the fragile hope of a better future. The airport bustled on, oblivious to their personal reckoning. In the background, announcements blared, and travelers hurried to gates. Life continued, yet something had shifted, if only by a margin. The system still needed more work, more empathy, more courage. But a first step had been taken. As Indira walked away, Williams exhaled, the image of her calm resilience lingering in his thoughts. Far from perfectly redeemed, he at least understood the weight of his actions. The gate might look the same as any other, but for both Indira and Williams, it stood as a silent monument to the power of facing one's faults and the possibility of forging new paths toward understanding.